All right, welcome back to the Enrichery Podcast. I am Melanie. I am the area director here at the Enrichery.
And I'm Ashley Krug. I am the location director in Katy Fulshear.
And today we are talking about private school admissions and the ISEE test and the process. So, why are we talking about this today, Ashley?
Good question. I think that this is the time of year where parents maybe not thinking about the IC, and it's an important time to be considering it, especially because you're going to be gearing up in the fall to start touring different schools in the Houston area. And this is one of the many requirements that parents will have to pursue for their child's admissions process.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think the number one misconception is about the IC when parents walk through our doors, give us a call? What do you think their biggest misconception is?
Sure. I think the biggest misconception that I hear from parents is that it's the biggest piece of the admission process. It's the piece that it takes into consideration. It's the most important part of the admission process, that if their student does not perform at their best, that it's the end all be all. And I think that brings a lot of anxiety for parents.
Yeah, and students too.
Absolutely.
Especially the older students who are taking that upper level, trying to get into those like really competitive high schools.
Absolutely.
This last season we saw was so competitive. And I think just historically, this was probably our biggest IC season overall because so many families were in a panic. We had families who were starting way ahead of the game, but then we had families who were making last minute decisions because of all of the district changes and things like that.
Sure.
And so I think this is something really important to hone in on and talk about as we enter a whole new season.
Absolutely. Okay, now be honest. When you first started at the Enrichery, did you know what the IC was?
I had no idea what the IC was at all. All of my kids are in public school, and thankfully we've had a really great experiences at the school that they're schools that they're in. But when I came to the Enrichery, I saw, ISEE Prep, and I was looking through the curriculum. I was like, what is this? And so, of course, it's explained to me. And funnily enough, that was actually one of my very first clients was an ISEE client.
Oh, wow.
So I had to learn very, very fast about the test and about ISEE, the process, but then also like private school admissions. And it's almost as competitive, if not more competitive than college admissions.
Absolutely. And I'll say, just from my experience as an admissions professional in the Houston area, it is really competitive. We have parents that are seeking admission even before their child is born. So I completely understand.
Yeah, definitely. But by the end of this episode, I think, our main point is to kind of alleviate some of that stress, talk through what this process really looks like for parents and for students. It's a long process and it can be stressful, but that's why we're here.
Sure.
So yeah. So let's start at the very beginning. What does IC even mean?
Independent school entrance exam.
Yeah. And it's given by the ERB, which is the Educational Records Bureau. And so, it's a heavy test for some students. And, parents always ask who administers it. How do you get your curriculum? What do y'all do to help us through this? And so we'll walk through that. There's three different levels. So we've got the lower IC, which is for entrance into 5th and 6th grade. Middle IC, which is for kind of an unnatural entry point for some schools, which is 7th and 8th grade. And then that upper IC, which is entrance into 9th through 11th grade. Do you remember maybe your first IC student that you ever worked with, or even just like an IC situation in your past career?
Sure. So I think that the biggest thing, as I mentioned, the misconception is just that this is the end all be all. And I think it's just the reassurance that, yes, this is part of the admissions process, and helping parents understand exactly what the score or what the test is looking for, and how you can prepare, and providing access to different resources.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, IC is just one part of the puzzle because it is a much larger situation. It's much like SAT, ACT. It's not just the test that admissions are looking at.
Absolutely.
So I think a big question we get is what is on the test for families who have never gone through this before. We get families who have been through this with, their older students. So they kind of come to us and they're kind of pros at that point. But we do have families who come to us and they have no idea what to expect, what this test is testing their students on. What do you think what section do you think trips kids up the most when they start ISEE?
Ooh, great question. I would say the math sections because there's two different kinds of math sections, and I'm not sure that parents are always familiar that there's two different two different types of math sections.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the questions I get a lot is like, why are there two math sections? Because there's a reading comprehension section, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's reading through passages, answering those questions. And then the verbal reasoning section, which is synonyms and vocabulary, which happens to be, my favorite section because I love those things. But then you have that quantitative reasoning section, where it's not straightforward.
Absolutely.
It's very abstract. And that's how I explain it to parents. They're testing how your student thinks about this math question.
Absolutely.
It's not
critical thinking skills. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then that section is really testing them on stuff that they haven't seen yet in math. And I think that's where a lot of students definitely get tripped up.
Absolutely. I think that, parents recognizing it's not just like the things that they covered the previous year or the things that they're covering, maybe some of the things they're covering right now, but it's going to go beyond that. It's going to be the second semester and these students are taking these exams in the fall. So, pushing them to start even earlier, as I mentioned, like over the summer where demands are less there and there's not all the club soccer and baseball and things like that. It's really helpful. So the outside demands are limited.
Yeah, definitely. And then they throw in an essay at the end.
Yes,
which,
they do.
Which I think that, really, if I think back on it, I think a lot of parents worry about that because writing is so... It's hit or miss with each student. And I think in this day and age, writing is somewhat of a weaker concept for a lot of students because we've moved into the digital age where they're not having to do writing the way we used to.
I understand completely. I think about it just in the sense, not just being digital, but also AI and access to that and how that impacts student work and performance. So yes, I think the essay is another area that may trip students up, and that yes, it's not scored, but it's something that schools definitely look at and consider as part of that admission process.
Exactly. So our coaches, we really hone in on, while it's not scored, it's still important to work through those writing skills with these students, introduce them to some prompts that they may see at each level, and work on those writing skills. And especially because a lot of students will take a paper test, which we'll get into in a minute, but they'll take a paper test and they have to physically write this essay, which students are really not familiar with depending on what schools they're coming from. Okay, so there's different testing formats, different testing logistics. So we've got the paper test, we've got the digital test. You can take it at home, you could take it at a testing center, you could take it at a school.
Yes, there's so many different options.
Yeah, I know. Which format do you usually recommend to families?
I think when I'm talking to family, it's really student specific because there are students who are easily distracted. And just imagine trying to take a test at home where there could be a lot of different distractions. I know that when I am at home, I see lots of different things that I could be working on instead of what I need to be doing. So I think those are, things that to consider. Whereas sometimes it's easier to take a test at a school, the school that your student may be applying to, so that you can also see the school. And then also thinking about the paper. I think that some students really benefit from being able to work through the assessment by doing it on paper. But I think it's really student specific.
Yeah, I agree. So with our program, we start off with a diagnostic and we usually will start with paper just to see how they do. Students tend to test better on paper, just kind of historically, and we have the data to back that up. But for some students, paper may be somewhat impossible for them, especially because you throw in the Scantron.
Absolutely. I think about students with dysgraphia and like struggling to fill in the Scantron or writing out the essay. that's a lot of stamina that you're putting on their hand to be able to do. So sometimes that digital format may be better.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I think another thing that families get tripped up on is the seasons of the test. So,
Yes.
getting into the logistics of it, it's not like SAT, ACT where you can go and take it 1 month and then the next month you take it.
Absolutely.
Or if you take SAT 1 month, you can go take ACT the next month. It's
Mhm.
not like that. I see you can only take it one time per season.
Sure.
And the seasons are kind of spread out.
They are. They're like sort of set up like trimesters,
Yeah.
which is very different than a regular school year.
Yeah.
And that's something that private schools do look at, just
Mhm.
trying to figure out, when did you take the test? So
Right.
usually, those summer tests are usually the ones that we see families relocating to the Houston area take.
Mhm.
Whereas something, in the fall and winter times are usually those students who are in the midst of the regular admissions cycle.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the IC season, so fall is August to November, and
Mhm.
then winter is December to March, and
Mhm.
then the spring is April to
Mhm.
July.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have really essentially, I usually tell families two times to take the test.
Yes.
If you're not transferring in from, a different area of the country,
Absolutely.
things like that.
Yes, and that's true of just private schools in general. We
Mhm.
do recommend taking the test twice,
Yeah.
just because usually the first time it could be that student's very, very first time in front of the IC, and it gives you a nice sort of practice run before the actual exam that you would give to a
Yeah.
school. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So I know that some families will struggle with, where should my student take the test? They already struggle with the digital versus paper. And once they've nailed that down, it's like, okay, where does my student take the test? I've had families who have done the IC in the past at home. And like you were saying, the distractions,
Sure.
that's why they want to pivot to, we want to go to a testing center.
Mhm.
We've even had students take their test in our office before.
Absolutely.
If we're able to do it,
Mhm.
because they're already used to our environment,
Mhm.
but you also don't have to clear anything out of our offices like you do at home. You don't have the dog running around, siblings screaming,
Absolutely.
the TV and all of that.
Mhm.
So, I think there's definitely options, and you're right, it's different for every family and every student.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think one of the most confusing parts of IC is the scoring,
Yeah.
because there are multiple different scores that you kind of dive
Mhm,
into,
mhm.
and parents don't really know, like, what are they looking at, what are they taking, and what is our goal? And I think that's
Sure.
the biggest stressor, is what does our goal need to be,
Mhm.
and how do we know the goal, because there's so many different types of scores with this test.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, what we really lean on are those Stanine scores,
Yeah.
because that's the most reflective
Yes.
of the student's performance.
Yeah.
So it combines all of the information gained from the student's answers, and then how it lines up with the other students that are applying for that particular grade level.
I think that's what I found most interesting when I was learning about the IC, is that when a student goes and takes that test, they're compared against the other students in that pool that took the same test. And so that's where that Stanine comes in, is like, this is where, from 1 to 9, this is where your student ranked, basically, when it comes to that score. 5 being kind of the middle ground. In your experience, just because you've worked in the private school admissions side of things, what do schools typically look at look for when they are looking at Stanine scores?
Absolutely. I think, really what we're looking for is a score that falls in the above average range. Those are the students that generally are the most successful in the private school environment, because the academic rigor is there. And we just want to make sure that they're going to be, moving into a position where they're going to be successful, or that we're able to support them. Maybe your Stanine score is wonderful in most of the areas but one. Maybe it's the verbal reasoning. And why is that? Is that something, reflected in the recommendation form? And based on the information from the teacher recommendation form and the IC, is this something we can support in our environment? And sometimes it is. A lot of times the academic pieces can be addressed, whereas some of the behavioral things, depending on the different school, is a little bit harder to address,
Right.
given the resources available in public school versus private school.
Yeah, yeah. I know that, the most rigorous schools in our area, so Kinkaid, St. John's,
Mhm.
those types of schools, which are typically the schools that at least upper level students are trying to get
Absolutely.
into,
Mhm.
they're looking for the 7s to 9s.
Yes,
But then you've got
yes.
schools like St. Francis, who,
Mhm.
will take a student that got a 5,
Mhm.
and that's where the other pieces come in, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, teacher recommendation, the student visit day.
Mhm.
Sometimes there's even opportunities for a parent interview. So, what schools are really looking for are students and families that fit the mission of the school. Are you drawn to this school because, for example, in a Montessori environment is very different than a traditional setting?
Mhm.
Are you on board with that? And essentially, did you drink the Kool-Aid? Are you okay with Montessori? And what does that look like? Are you practicing that at home? So
Mhm.
really looking for that mission alignment. And that's why I said it's really not just about the IC, it's a very holistic view of the
Yeah.
student.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great point, and that kind of speaks personally to me because I come from a background of early childhood education where,
Mhm.
the centers that I worked in, we were more traditional, with a touch of Montessori. But then we had families who would come and tour, and they came from a more Montessori background and really did not align with our way of doing things.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a great point. Going and
Mhm.
touring those schools in the fall and just making sure that your student is a fit, your family is a fit, because
Mhm.
this is going to be your community for, the next 5 to 10 plus
Absolutely. It could
years.
be their yes, and there's schools that it could be their school for their entire academic journey
Mhm.
too. I mean, you think about places like St. John's, it's K through 12. They
Right.
could be there the whole time. Are you willing to dedicate, sort of your lifestyle to fit into that school community?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a great point. Um, so, and I think just kind of going back to the scoring end of things,
Mhm.
when you're talking about stanines, it goes from 1 to 9, and I know a common misconception is if my student gets a 6, that means they got 60% of their
Oh,
questions
yes.
right. And so it's like, no, not really. That's not really how it goes. That's more of like the raw score where we're looking at, how many questions did they get right out of the amount of questions in that testing section.
Mhm.
So that's more like the raw score, but that stanine is really just comparing to the other students. Where did your student land amongst them?
Yes, absolutely. The state nines are more of a reflection of the analysis that's done by the IC, and they're
Mhm.
saying, this is a score we're giving based on the percentile that you are in, and
Yeah.
the questions that you answered correctly up against the students that are also applying to that same grade level in the school.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So, real talk, when should a family start this process?
Yes, I think this is the time of year to start. So, yes, most private schools have wrapped up admissions for the upcoming school year. However, this is the time where a lot of events are going on at schools. These are opportunities for you to see schools in real time. You can see what the community truly is.
Mhm.
Go to the Bearcat celebration, go to the volleyball tournament, go to those events so you can get a sense of what these communities are like.
Yeah.
And then you can start to think about, okay, this is the school that I think, I might be interested. Build that list, make that spreadsheet, start to do that analysis now so you can narrow it down. And then also list all the requirements. And,
Mhm.
if IC is a requirement, summer would be a great time to prepare for that. Like I said, there's less demand. There might be some travel, but I think that our programming really offers the flexibility to work around student and family schedules.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a concern for a lot of families coming
Mhm.
to our program is, a lot of our students will do this in the summertime, but they've got vacations and camps and things like that. And then that's great. We want
Mhm.
students, I think private schools really treasure that as far as, when they're
Absolutely.
looking at families, how well-rounded are these students? Are these
Mhm.
students well-traveled? Have they been to certain places and things like that and had these
Mhm.
experiences? So
Mhm.
those parts are important. And with our program, we do have the flexibility to, let them go and do their fun stuff. But hey, we're going to focus on IC too during the summer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um, so open houses for private school typically take place.
Sure, as early as, the end of September
Mhm.
all the way through December. In addition to open houses, there's generally tours. Some of these tours may be individual, some are group tours. And then usually those deadlines are wrapping up right before winter break. So it's not a lot of time to spend exploring so many schools. That's why it's great to start now and start narrowing that list down.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's something to be said for families who get started early versus families who don't. And so we saw a lot of both this past cycle. We had, like I said earlier, we had the families that got started really early, did their prep during the summer, and their students had ample time to take a test in the fall, a test in the winter. They hit deadlines. But then we always have the panicked families who, maybe weren't thinking about this before. Maybe something happened and they decided just,
Need to pivot.
Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly. I will say, I think there's something to be said about getting started earlier. Doing your research. Is this a move that we need to make? Because the stress level is way different on a student who got started earlier, has that ample time to kind of be prepared, versus the student and the family who are kind of just now making the decision. And now we have to really try to make sure that this score is going to be what it needs to be for that one test that we have left in the winter.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, like you said before, the stress that the parents are feeling sort of trickles down to the student, and that's going to impact their performance. So definitely starting early is key.
Yeah, definitely. So given your background, and I'm just going to keep leaning on that.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit, and you've kind of covered this already, but tell me a little bit just more in depth of the holistic review, because that is really what it is for private school admissions. They're not just looking at the test. And so for our students who maybe they don't test well, who they try really hard, they adhere to the program, their homework, whatever type of program that they're doing, but they just can't quite get past the 5s, the 6s. What does that look like for those students?
Absolutely. And I think when I was an admissions director, what I focused on is painting the picture of who the student was. I want to build a story. I want to tell a story when I'm talking to, our different teachers and different departments, who the student is and what they're capable of doing. If the student is coming from, let's say, a River Oaks elementary school, we know they have a solid curriculum at that public school. And generally, we're seeing good performance overall on their report cards and things like that. And then we get the teacher recommendation form. It's absolutely glowing, talking about their responsibility and level of independence. And then you get that score and it's a 5 and you're like, oh, well, that's a little different. What's going on here? Let me ask some more questions. I think it really starts to, drive that curiosity. And we really want to understand more why that student is performing there. So the admissions person might actually reach out to the family, or sometimes, at least in my role, we had students come and visit. So even though that score might have been a little bit lower than we're expecting, we have all these other pieces to the puzzle that says this student's really capable. Maybe this was a one-off day. Let's bring them in and see what they do in the environment. How do they interact with the teacher? How do they interact with the materials in the room? How do they interact with the other students? And a lot of times we get to see the true student. And like you said, they just didn't test well.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And, I think that's great because like we said earlier, with private schools, they're really looking to build a community. This is going to be kind of your family outside of your family for the next few years, or even like you said earlier, that you're pretty much your whole life. And so I think it's great that the process is so holistic. We have helped students do resumes, for those upper IC kiddos. We have had students who we've helped them with their interview prep and things like that. And I think that is, something that students get kind of nervous about, is that interview.
I'm sure they do. Yeah. I have to talk to an adult. Yes. I have to talk to the admissions director. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I completely understand. And I think, like I said, it's just a piece of the puzzle. And I always, when I'm meeting with families and students, be yourself. We want to see what you can do.
Exactly.
Come in with that positive attitude. they're also assessing the school too.
Mhm.
Do you like this school?
Yeah.
Do you see yourself here?
Yep. It's like when as adults, we interview for jobs, we're nervous.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I think putting it into that perspective of like, they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them.
Absolutely.
And so it's not so much about, like you said, it's not so much about giving the kids the answers because we don't know what they're going to ask. It very much is make eye contact with them, be confident, and be yourself.
Yes,
and I think that's
absolutely.
super important for some of our more timid students, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So, we are part of the Enrichery. And I do want to kind of just brag on all of our
Yes.
locations. We had an amazing, amazing acceptance just reports from all of our families throughout all of our locations, which I think was really great. Some of our locations are kind of heavier on the IC end of things just because we are near more private schools. But even like your location, Katy and Fulshear, y'all had a great IC season as well, because something that I found interesting was, as I was learning this process, families will drive across Houston to get their student to the right school, which, I have one of my kids at a charter school, which is outside of our district. We do drive her every day. It's not a long drive, but I have told my husband, like, if we ever moved, like, we would continue to make that drive because she's thriving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the piece in Houston is that it is really easy. Like, oh, now I'm in Katy.
Yeah, right.
And I don't want to leave that community that I've, established all these friends and networking. So yes, there are families that we did work with that were interested in private schools that were in the Houston area. And then also what's really nice is there's all these like hidden gems there in Katy that not everybody knows about that also require the IC exam. So yes.
Yeah. So as a company, we saw acceptances to schools like Audie, Strake, St. Agnes, Episcopal, St. Thomas, St. Francis, just to name a few. Houston Christian. I feel like we had a lot of students who got into Houston Christian. So it's been really great just to hear from those families and see how excited the students are when they get those acceptances. And so, yeah, it's been great. I do want to kind of share a success story from when I first started.
Oh, I would love that.
So we had a student, she actually still attends our Katy Freeway location. And as she was going through the IC process, her family got started very, very early because they knew that she struggled in school a little bit. She had a goal to get into her, top choice school in Houston. And she did IC prep with us for almost a year. And it was a journey for them. During that year, she got diagnosed with a few learning differences. And so we were able to better understand kind of, how is her brain working? How do we need to adhere our curriculum and our process to her? And at the end of everything, she went and took that test in the fall and got into her top choice school. And she is just thriving. And so every time I see her come into the office and she's a sophomore now.
Wow.
And so she is working on, all of these different things. Her mom just contacted me for SAT, ACT prep now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so cool. We've watched her go through that journey. So every time I, talk about IC, I just always have her in my mind of like, that's our one of our best success stories.
That is
I think.
so true. There's always those students that just stick with you.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's coming back just speaks to the level of individualization that we were able to help and support her. And she sounds like she might even be excited to come back.
Yes. Yeah, she is. She is very, very excited. Every time she comes in, she's got a great connection with her coaches who have been with her for, a couple years now. So it's awesome. So kind of diving into our program. So we talk a lot about IC prep. What does that actually look like from our end of things? How do we do this without getting into, the nitty gritty of everything, just kind of a general overview of what our program looks like?
Sure. So it's a 14-week program where we start working with students. Typically, we start with a diagnostic exam. That really gives us a baseline score so we can understand sort of the child's strengths and weaknesses. Where do we need to hone in, maybe spend a little bit more time? And then there are weekly sessions, which vary in time based on the level. So lower level would be an hour and a half, and then the upper level would be 2 hours. And then there's actually 3 full-length mocks that are built into that 14-week program that help them practice.
Yeah. And one of the things that I love about our program is that our coaches really dedicate a lot of time digging into those mocks and getting deep into the data that we are able to see from these students to where we can really individualize this program, because it's not one size fits all. Every student comes to us with different strengths, different areas that they need support in, different learning differences, and and different accommodations as well. And I think that, with our mocks, we adhere to those accommodations, very much kind of mimic exactly what they're going to experience when it comes to their official test.
Absolutely. And the fact that they're working one-on-one with that coach. So everything is really personalized for that student, and they are really curious to understand more about the student and also connect with them. The more rapport that's there, the more buy-in from the student, the better the results.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's tackle the questions we get all the time when it comes to just kind of the beginning of the ISEE, when we get that call, when parents come into our offices. So we kind of talked about when we should start. I think this one is good. What if my child has test anxiety?
That is a very common thing that comes through.
Yeah.
And I think, there's more pressure on students now to perform. So I can understand exactly why they're feeling a lot of test anxiety. I think part of our program really focuses on the strategies. And I think leaning on those strategies helps alleviate a lot of that anxiety, because you're not going to know all of the answers to the questions, and that's okay. So now we have to figure out how we're going to keep moving forward without getting tripped up. And what does that look like?
Yeah. And that's where those mock tests come in as well. They've already seen the test. Their diagnostic is the first step, and then they have those 3 other mock tests to take throughout the process. So by the time they get to that official, they're comfortable with the test. They kind of know what to expect. It won't be identical to what they've seen, but it's still the same feeling.
Absolutely. It's still familiar.
Exactly.
Because you have that same similar environment, because also if they come and take it right here in the Enrichery, then it's very familiar.
Yes, exactly. Another common question we get is, do schools see all of our scores? So I'll let you answer that, because you've been there.
No, they don't. So you send the scores to whatever school you'd like. So you decide, you know, and some schools are willing to accept something that you took a year ago, whereas some schools want to see something recent.
Right.
So you decide, where did you perform the best? What puts what paints the best picture of what you can do and who you are as a student?
Yeah. I think that's always a tough decision when your student takes multiple tests, because sometimes they get, 9s across the board, but maybe they got an 8 in one section. So they go and retake it. But then maybe in that next test, they actually got, 9s maybe across the board in other sections, but in a different section, they got an 8 or a 7. And so families will always say, like, what do we do?
Absolutely.
And you can tailor it to each school, right? Like, you can send one set of scores to one school, one set of scores to a different school.
Yes.
So I think that's something super important for families to know. What about, let's see here. I mean, are there any other questions that you feel like you get from families that we could answer?
We covered a lot. We talked a lot about the timeline. We talked a lot about the holistic review. We talked a lot about tailoring it to students with different backgrounds, whether it's learning differences, test anxiety, or maybe just some content gaps. I can't think of any other questions to ask.
Well, good. Then we were well prepared. So if a parent remembers one thing from this episode, what would you want it to be? You go first, and then I'll go next.
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway that I always encourage parents to do, start early. It's never too early to start. Like I said, even if the baby's not even here yet, it's okay to start looking. Things are competitive. Go in with an open mind. There may be schools that you didn't even know existed that may be a good fit.
Yeah. I think one thing that I would want families to know is that much like when you're figuring out where your student is going to go to college, your student will end up where they end up. And your
Mhm.
student, you will make it what you make it. And
Absolutely.
that's something that, kind of an encouraging thing that I tell
Mhm.
parents is like, hey,
Mhm.
we're going to work as hard as possible to get them where they need to be test wise. But wherever they get accepted, they're going to do amazing because they're amazing kids. Every single one of our
Absolutely.
students has
Yes, they are.
amazing qualities. So I just, I get so excited when families
And
start
that's
this
the point of that
process.
holistic view is that
Yes.
those schools really want to find the kids that are going to be most successful in their environments. They don't want to put them in a place where they're feeling defeated. That's
Yeah.
the worst feeling ever. So looking at the whole student is really important. So yes, you're right. Where they land is the perfect fit for them.
Exactly, exactly. So how can parents reach out to us if they want some help?
Well, we have 7 different locations, so we are all over Houston. You can definitely find the place that's closest to you. We have a location in Bel Air, we have a location off of Katy Freeway, as well as Memorial West, and then we have our Town Lake, Katy Fulshear, and Sugarland, and then of course the Woodlands. So there's lots of different options for
Yeah,
parents.
I'm glad you mentioned the Woodlands. It's so
Of
new.
course.
So what are we talking about next episode? I think we talked about SAT, ACT prep for our next episode. So I'm really excited about that.
Yes, me too. And it's so interesting how much similarity there are between the two different tests and how schools look at them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for coming to our
Oh, my
podcast today. It
pleasure.
was really nice talking to you. Families, feel free to reach out to us if you need any help. Like Ashley said, we've got those 7 locations in Houston. We are consistently growing as a company. Remember, when it comes to ISEE and private school admissions, to plan ahead, and that equals peace of mind. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.